Good afternoon. The 9,019th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is Security Council Resolutions 1160 of 1998, 1199 of 1998, 1203 of 1998, 1239 of 1999, and 1244 of 1999. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Serbia to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. On behalf of the Council, I welcome His Excellency, Mr. Nikola Selakovic, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Serbia. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Ms. Caroline Ziade, Special Representative of the Secretary-General and Head of the United Nations Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo, to participate in the meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Ms. Donika Govala-Schwartz to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2022/313, the report of the Secretary-General on the UN Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo. I now give the floor to Ms. Caroline Ziade.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished members of the Security Council, I am honored to be with you today as the new Special Representative of the Secretary-General and Head of UNMIK, to thank you for your ongoing support and to brief you on the mission's operations during the past 6 months, taking account of developments in the regions since the end of the official reporting period. As I brief you today, developments in Ukraine inevitably have and will continue to influence all issues of European security, including in the mission's area of operations. I am as well briefing you today on the heels of the Serbian elections conducted on April 3rd. Although the final results are pending, the overall outcome is clear. The current majority party in Serbia retains a secure public mandate. It is worth noting that the ruling coalition in Pristina also presently enjoys a comfortable majority in parliament. Such circumstances, Mr. President, can sometimes lend themselves to courageous leadership decisions. In the lead-up to the Serbian general elections, the international community had urged Pristina and Belgrade authorities to agree on modalities to facilitate eligible voters' participation in Kosovo. This would have been in line with the practices of preceding years. This time, a solution was not identified to permit this. Together with my international colleagues and the representatives of various member states, I regretted the polarizing effect of this decision, since it divided public opinion sharply along ethnic lines. Nevertheless, more than 19,000 voters from Kosovo did participate by casting their vote at special polling stations established in Serbia. Thanks to an impressive logistical exercise facilitated with support from both sides, the election process passed smoothly and without incident. Mr. President, the resilience of democratic institutions throughout the Balkans region is a crucial factor in the maintenance of a secure and democratic Europe. Earlier this month, I met with the re-elected President of Serbia, as well as other government leaders in Belgrade. I was encouraged by the very direct and open conversation I had there. Mr. President, unfortunately, incident of serious concern took place only a few days ago in northern Kosovo, with attacks apparently directly targeting Kosovo police patrols. Gunshots were fired at the patrols, along with stones and pyrotechnic devices thrown. While the motive is yet unknown, these criminal attacks were brazen. I have urged the public at large and officials on all sides to join in condemning such violence and to provide any information they may have to law enforcement so that those responsible are swiftly identified and brought to justice. Today, I wish to call upon the leaders of both Pristina and Belgrade to be very judicious in their actions and in their political rhetoric. During such complex days, these leaders bear the main responsibility for reducing tensions rather than fueling them. This applies at the political level and equally in the public arena. For these reasons, I have also urged both sides to engage constructively and more actively in the EU-facilitated dialogue. I have received reassurances of this commitment during my recent meetings. Mr. President, I have yet to be provided the opportunity to meet with the Prime Minister or President in Pristina, and this, of course, is an important prerequisite for constructive and positive engagement. I have, however, met with most leaders from across the political spectrum in Pristina, including those from the parties in power, those in opposition, and political independents. I will also regularly reach out to leaders in other parts of the Balkans neighborhood to hear their perspectives on relations with Kosovo and on dialogue. I am sure that the political actors in the region will demonstrate, indeed, their understandings that dialogue and compromise represent the only viable path towards stability, prosperity, and security for all. Mr. President, yesterday marked the 9th anniversary of the first agreement of principles governing the normalization of relations. While this process has led to meaningful results on various practical matters, a comprehensive normalization of relations between the two sides so far continue to be elusive. Even on extremely technical subjects discussed during this reporting period, such as vehicle registration plates, progress remains tentative and slow. As we meet here today, we cannot be sure whether Belgrade and Pristina will achieve an agreed solution on that matter by tomorrow's deadline. I would like to encourage Pristina and Belgrade proactively to seek a permanent solution to the vehicle license issue, along with other issues concerning the freedom of movement, as well as the energy agreements. Whatever the pace of discussion, which we hope will increase, another principle bears re-emphasizing. However difficult the path toward agreement and solutions, unilateral action from any side have the potential to damage the real interests of the people on both sides. Mr. President, dramatic shocks to Kosovo's and other regional economies were building up well before the onset of events in Ukraine. Following 2 years of the global COVID-19 pandemic, economies have been struggling to first manage, then recover from that disease's profound effects on health, as well as social and economic well-being. Inflation, supply shortages, rising interest rates, and increasing debt burdens were already occurring and have since been exacerbated. In this context, finding practical modes of economic cooperation between Belgrade, Pristina, and all the neighbors of the region assumes greater urgency. Any region-wide initiatives which can help toward promoting this objective should be welcomed. Reducing restrictions on the movement of people and the flows of goods and capital can only help all neighbors in the region weather current and future challenges. Mr. President, since my arrival in Pristina, I have witnessed firsthand the internal and external challenges which weigh upon Kosovo's political leadership. The expectations for progress and reform are exceptionally high. The current government will depend both upon wise decision-making as well as strong international support to fulfill its ambitious agenda and to deliver for the people. It is logical, then, that the subject of improving relationships sits atop the agenda for so many of Kosovo's regional and international interlocutors. Reconciliation and addressing the grievances of the past should reinforce the pursuit of important strategic objectives. Mr. President, allow me at the outset of my mandate to be very clear about two important points. First, as Belgrade and Pristina each know well, my responsibility is to offer objective information to the Secretary General and the Security Council. I will remain always open to listening to all views. However, the contents of the Secretary General's reports are not the subject of negotiation. Second, UNMIC is not a determinant factor nor the spokesperson of any particular view regarding a just and lasting settlement between parties. This is not our role. Too often, since my arrival, I have heard insinuations that UNMIC in and of itself represents either an obstacle or a vehicle for the outcome preferred by one or the other side, or that UNMIC itself harbors a particular agenda to forward or favor outside the bounds of its mandate, which is to ensure conditions for a peaceful and normal life for all inhabitants of Kosovo. That's the mandate. Neither of these inaccurate perceptions contain any demonstrable truth, yet both have too frequently been allowed to gain currency in local public discourse. Accordingly, we will continue our work in the areas where we are genuinely able to help forward the common objectives held by authorities, communities, and institutions in Kosovo. UNMIC's legacy of institutional support, its trust among communities and political actors, and its work with the full spectrum of multilateral and bilateral actors will drive my mission's agenda. Naturally, this includes working in synergy with the United Nations family of agencies, funds, and programs, and in partnership with the international community. Progress in high-level political discussions, in particular the EU-facilitated dialogue, can be supported and aided by intensified people-to-people work on the ground. My mission remains a locus of relevant knowledge, experience, and subject area expertise, which serves Kosovo's institutions and communities. supporting an active civil society, promoting new tools to help Kosovo reinforce the rule of law, contributing to the empowerment of women and youth, providing expertise and support to human rights mechanisms. All these will remain major priorities. Of course, we will continue to explore all areas where we can make fruitful contributions under the mandate which you have given to us. Mr. President, I wish to close by saying that the Council's support to our mission remains essential. Equally important is your attention to the state of relations between Pristina and Belgrade. Even though we realize that many new and difficult situations demand your attention. Our effort as a mission will remain focused on contributing to stability, political progress, respect for human rights, supporting the women, peace and security, and youth peace and security agenda, and creating and promoting greater intercommunity trust and dialogue in Kosovo and in the region. On behalf of all the mission staff, I thank you for your continuing support to UNMIK. And thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Ms. Ziadeh for her briefing. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Nikola Selakovic, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Serbia.
Thank you. Distinguished President of the Security Council, esteemed members of the Security Council, distinguished Special Representative, I have the great honor to address this august body once again on the occasion of the latest report of the Secretary General on the work of the United Nations mission in the territory of our southern province, Kosovo and Metohija. I would like to emphasize once again that the Republic of Serbia sees the engagement of UNMIK as one of the key factors for maintaining peace and security in Kosovo and Metohija. Mr. President, the situation in Kosovo and Metohija is far from normal and stable. In this part of our country, citizens of Serbian nationality, as well as other non-Albanians, are still distressed and are facing each new day with great apprehension because they are uncertain if their fundamental human rights could be violated or denied. Such feelings are a reaction to the instability generated by the provisional institutions of self-government in Pristina. The goal of Pristina, based on everything we have been witnessing on the ground, is to have even more Serbs and other non-Albanians leave Kosovo they will recur and become more complex. For all persons living in Kosovo and Metohija, it is extremely important to send a message from this meeting to those who have the authority in their hands and who have the capacity to change the situation for the better. And that message should point to the need to establish inter-ethnic trust by having the provisional institutions in Pristina respect the agreements reached, implement what was agreed, and harmonize their actions with international standards regarding the rule of law and human rights. Esteemed members of the Security Council, on 16 January this year, the provisional institutions of self-government in Pristina, contrary to UN Security Council Resolution 1244, but also to all democratic principles, banned the organization of a referendum in Kosovo and Metohija on amending the Constitution of the Republic of Serbia in the field of the judiciary. Despite the great efforts of international factors, including the countries of the Quint and the European Union, to ensure that this does not happen, Pristina repeated this illegal act and made it impossible to organize the presidential and parliamentary elections of Serbia in Kosovo and Metohija on 3 April this year. We note that this was the first time since 1999 that citizens in Kosovo and Metohija were prevented from participating in the elections of the Republic of Serbia, which was a violation, among other things, of the clearly defined mandate of the OSCE mission regarding the organization of elections. By doing so, the provisional institutions of self-government in Pristina once again demonstrated their discriminatory character and sent a message that unilateralism is the principle on which they act. In the same way, that is unilaterally, on 20 September, the provisional institutions deployed special police units with armored vehicles at 2 administrative crossings to central Serbia, which confiscated license plates of vehicles from the north of Kosovo and Metohija and central Serbia. The manner in which this was done showed that their goal was clearly to intimidate Serbs from the north of the province, and what came as a consequence was a justified revolt of the local population. The Serbs who are victims of such actions do not find the wounds to be as painful as the terror that is carried out daily by Pristina against the Serbian people, both south and north of the Ibar River. I have just quoted the words of Srećko Sofronijević from the town of Zvečan in Kosovo and Metohija, uttered while he was laying in a hospital bed. On October 13, members of the special police shot him in the back with a firearm when they made an incursion into the north of the province for the 9th time, contrary to the Brussels agreement that is illegally. We would prefer it if his name was included in the report we are discussing today. Fear of uncertainty among Serbs and other non-Albanians in Kosovo and Metohija is also caused by the work done by the judiciary, which acts on secret indictments contrary to all international standards. The sad reality is that today in Kosovo and Metohija, if you are a Serb, you can be sentenced to many years in prison on the basis of unverified or contradictory witness statements, without irrefutable and unambiguous material evidence. This indicates the practice of passing judgments according to the one's ethnicity, not according to law and justice. The malign nationalism of the authorities in Pristina is manifested through ignoring the political representatives of Serbs in institutions, thus making decisions without their participation, and readiness to permanently remove the leaders of the Serb community through politically mounted investigations and judicial proceedings. This creates an atmosphere of complete insecurity and leads to the exodus of Serbs from Kosovo and Metohija. To illustrate this, let me remind you of the events in the municipality of Štrpce on December 21st, 2021, in which 11 Serbs were arrested, including former mayor and vice president of the Serbian list, Bratislav Nikolić, who is still in custody under the alleged fight against corruption. On that same occasion, the employees in the municipality were informed that they were no longer coming to work, which brought into question the existence of dozens of Serbian families. Esteemed members of the Security Council, Pristina has been openly saying for a long time that the establishment of the Community of Serb Municipalities envisaged by the Brussels Agreement signed 9 years ago will not be allowed. This is This not only undermines the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina, but also directly humiliates international factors, primarily the European Union. With such statements, Pristina sends a message to the Serbian people in the province that they should not count on the exercise of collective rights such disfranchisement should ultimately lead to Serbs disappearing entirely from Kosovo and Metohija. Unfortunately, there are still many ethnically motivated incidents, hate speech, intimidation, violation of the right to a fair trial, threatening the rights to the freedom of movement and religious rights, desecration of churches, monasteries, and cemeteries. And instead of spending good part of your precious time listing them, a non-paper was distributed to you detailing the recorded incidents against Serbs in Kosovo and Metohija during the reporting period. The number and nature of incidents, and only in the reporting period there were 63 according to our records, unequivocally speaks of the high degree of threat and exposure of continuous discrimination against the Serb and other non-Albanian population. The cause and effect relationship between the issue of the return of displaced persons and the number of incidents on ethnic grounds is obvious. In such conditions, the reasons why there are still more than 200,000 internally displaced Serbs and other non-Albanians from Kosovo and Metohija in the Republic of Serbia are easy to understand. We are convinced that it is in this context, in particular, that UNMIK could and should play an important role. We welcome the UN Secretary General's call for enabling the return of internally displaced persons. To this end, concrete measures are needed to ensure, inter alia, the safety of returnees and full respect for the property rights of displaced persons. We did not get the impression that the institutions in Pristina have the political will to change the situation for the better. We are witnessing the opposite. Serbs are intimidated in various ways, encouraged to leave their homes, and displaced persons are discouraged from returning to their places of birth. Such a practice is not in line with the values and principles publicly proclaimed by Pristina. We would like to see a clear political will and measures to prove that discrimination on national grounds is not a desirable social value in Kosovo and Metohija, and that coexistence is possible and necessary. The fastest and most efficient way to do that is to respect valid international legal documents and concluded agreements. Mr. President, in conclusion, I would like to emphasize that the Republic of Serbia will continue to constantly draw the attention of the international community to the problems in Kosovo and Metohija. Serbia is committed to the respect of international law and full implementation of United Nations Security Council Resolution 1244, which includes further UNMIK engagement and the presence of KFOR as a guarantor of peace and security. It is equally important that these international missions continue to operate in undiminished capacity, taking into account what has been said in today's debate. Thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Selakovic for his statement. I now give the floor to Ms. Donika Gawala-Schwartz.
Thank you very much. Dear Mr. President, honorable members of the Security Council, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be here as the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of my country, the Republic of Kosovo. This meeting today is taking place in a new era in Europe and in the world. The Europe which has existed before the Russian invasion in Ukraine isn't anymore. By destroying the post-war era, Russia is endangering the UN as well. Therefore, our debate today cannot be only about UNMIK, because it needs to take these fundamental changes into account as well. Mr. President, regarding the presence of the UN in the Republic of Kosovo, I can only report that all UN agencies, such as UNDP, UNHCR, UN Women, and many other agencies are very much respected and highly appreciated in Kosovo. However, today, when we talk about UNMIK, it is an entirely different story. UNMIK is not an administrative mission because Kosovo has a government. UNMIK is not a peacekeeping mission because Kosovo's law enforcement and KFOR guarantee the safety and security of our people. Basically, UNMIK is no longer playing a role in the lives of our citizens and our country. I believe that this is in itself a quite encouraging development. It proves that Kosovo, a sovereign state, is fulfilling its obligations towards its citizens and is a reliable and responsible counterpart for our partners in Europe and the world. We are glad that we could foster and extend our relationships with other countries, but not only in Europe, also in Africa, Asia, and America even more in the recent months. We are proud that not only at home, but also in many European countries and beyond, the Republic of Kosovo is respected as a vivid democracy with huge potential for the future. 14 years after Kosovo's independence, our republic is a globally established and recognized reality. Our country can count on many friends and partners in the region and around the globe. The vast majority of the EU and NATO countries recognized our independence, but also supported our goals to become a member of NATO, the European Union, and the United Nations. The Republic of Kosovo performed strongly in democratic, political, and economic terms. Yet, like all other countries, we have been hit by the pandemic and by the recent energy and food crisis. Kosovo also allocated resources to assist citizens and businesses in this period. After electing a new government in a landslide victory last year, Kosovo has reached a phase of a more transparent democracy, oriented towards a tough fight against the organized crime and a stronger presence of the rule of law. Mr. President, today our citizens have trust and hope in us, the government and our country. That trust translates into outstanding success in other areas. The economic growth in Kosovo is more than 10% in 2021, one of the biggest increases in Europe last year. We registered a significant increase in the budget revenues by more than 30%, and in foreign direct investments, these last 2 years have shown a significant increase by more than 65%. Trust of citizens. That is a very hard currency in every country. We have a government with great trust from our people, but also great expectations, which can be challenging, but it is paying off for the benefit of all. Thanks to our fight against corruption and organized crime, Kosovo has jumped up 17 places in the Transparency International Report 2021. We are glad, grateful, and proud that this government can rely on public support on our reforms. I am honored when decision makers from abroad tell us that Kosovo has become a role model for democracy and rule of law in our region. We will continue to uphold and strengthen these values. Mr. President, allow me to be clear that Kosovo's independence is not a result of a secessionist movement. Our country has been born out of genocide committed by Serbia. Kosovo had long resisted peacefully, non-violently, until we were forced to defend our families and lives in a brutal war. At the end, NATO came and rescued us. Kosovo survived Serbia's openly declared attempt to extinction. Today, we are an example for all victims of aggression and genocide that justice will always prevail in the end. Our people have made their choice a long time ago. We are part of the West, while Serbia, our northern neighbor, remains to be Russia's satellite. This is quite unique in Europe of today, and that shows the main reason why our region remains unstable. In just 18 months, 15,000 people out of 1.9 million were brutally killed in 1999. 20,000 women raped, countless war crimes and massacres committed. Thousands of houses, mosques, churches, schools, and whole villages were leveled to the ground. It is of utmost importance to mention that at the time, during the genocide, today's President Vučić was Milosevic's Minister for Propaganda. This, like in Bosnia-Herzegovina, was not a war. It was an extinction campaign, like Putin is trying it right now in Ukraine. We will never forget the victims, as should the world not. The world has just learned about Russian war crimes in Bucha and other places in Ukraine. Let me remind the horrific Serb war crimes against a small Catholic village in Kosovo, the Meja massacre, on April 27, 1999. Serb forces killed at least 377 civilians, of whom 36 were younger than 18. They were taken out of a refugee convoy and executed by the road. Serb forces transported the bodies to a site near Belgrade to cover up their crimes. This is only one of the many unspeakable atrocities committed by Serbia. And now here we are, 23 years later, listening to the same Serbian officials spewing hatred and perpetuating the same warmongering, inhuman rhetoric. Neither Mr. Vučić, who was part of the cabinet of the butchers of the Balkans, nor Mr. Selakovic, nor anybody else of these nationalists ever apologized, ever. Instead, they keep covering up and defending the war crimes. They praise the war criminals as heroes because the fundament of those crimes, namely only willed hatred against our nation, racism and Serb supremacy, is still strong and alive. Serbia is the biggest threat to normalization and peace in the region. Mr. President, instead of coming to terms with the past, they continue to destabilize the region, not only Kosovo. Just last September, the Serb president threatened our country with war. This was due to a dispute about license plates for cars. Mr. Vučić amassed troops and sent warplanes to our border over license plates for cars. So you see, it's not the past of Serbia who is dangerous for us. It is the behavior of the recent Serbia that should change. The Russian ambassador to Serbia supported the warmongering and even visited in September the Serbian troops at the border during that time. Following the same logic, the Russian ambassador to Bosnia-Herzegovina also just threatened his host country with war. Recently, our ethnically diverse police teams had become target of terrorist attacks, shootings at police and their cars. We are lucky that no one had been hurt so far. Attacks are coming from Serbian territory, and they would be impossible if Mr. Vučić would not tolerate them. He and his allies are risking conflict in the Balkans, from Kosovo to Bosnia-Herzegovina and to Montenegro. Serbia and Russia remain to be the biggest threat to peace in the region. If we do not close that Pandora's box, Mr. President, opened by Putin, Vučić, and Dodik, the Balkans might become a dark place again. When Vučić came in office, Serbia's military exercises with Putin's Russia were just two in a year. Last year, they did more than 100. Serbia has got special donations, namely warplanes, from Russia and Belarus. Serbia under Vučić is an unprecedented military build-up. It is an army ready to attack, not to defend. That is a major concern for all the neighbors in the region. It is not only the equipment, it is also the ideology. It is also the media campaigns. The world has to take this seriously, and as we and others in the region are warning since quite some time. Therefore, Kosovo and other countries in the region need to protect themselves from the aggressive, dangerous threat of an autocratic Serbia. Fortunately, we have friends and allies who are standing by our side. Deterrence, like in the Cold War, is working, and unfortunately it's necessary in dealing with both Russia and Serbia in the Western Balkans. At the same time, Mr. President, the Republic of Kosovo is eager, willing, and ready for dialogue. We want to move forward. For that to happen, however, Serbia needs to accept reality first. Without the fundamental recognition of reality, there can be no discussion, as we do not even have reality in common. The Republic of Kosovo is a peace-loving nation whose legality of independence has been confirmed by the International Court of Justice and who has been recognized by the majority of the world, indeed, the overwhelming majority of fellow peace-loving and democratic nations. There is nothing to lose or fear by recognizing Kosovo. There is, however, plenty to gain: a more peaceful, stable, and prosperous Europe, as well as a trusted and reliable ally. But Serbia has to make a decision now. It has to decide if it wants to be a part of the West or remain proxy of Russia. After Ukraine, one thing is for sure: sitting in two chairs at the same time, aligning with both parties is no longer an option. That time is gone. Russian aggression has ended that era. There is nothing provisional about the Republic of Kosovo and its independence. The Republic of Kosovo as a sovereign country is here to stay. Recognizing the reality is a fundamental step to a European future. I thank you very much.
I thank Ms. Gavala-Schwartz for her statement. I now give the floor to members of the Security Council who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank the new Special Representative and the head of the UN Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo, Ms. Caroline Ziade, for her first briefing to this Council on activities of UNMIK. We welcome the presence of His Excellency Mr. Nikola Selkovic, Foreign Minister of Serbia, in today's meeting. Let me begin by reiterating India's principled position of supporting the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Serbia. We believe that all outstanding issues need to be resolved through peaceful negotiations. In this regard, we take note of the meetings held between Serbia and authorities in Pristina since 2014 under the auspices of the European Union. It is important that meetings are held without any preconditions and in good faith. The implementation of signed agreements, including on the establishment of Association of Serb majority municipalities, will remain fundamental. Further, both sides need to find common ground to overcome mutual concerns, including political and ethnic issues. We welcome the ongoing efforts, including that of Quint members and EU, towards resumption of dialogue. The issue of missing persons, given its humanitarian nature, needs to be resolved on priority. We hope that with support of UNMIK, the authorities will be able to determine the fate of persons who remain missing. Voluntary and safe return of internally displaced persons from other countries in the region is also essential in terms of confidence-building measures. UNMIC should continue, together with other international partners, to encourage the Pristina authorities to address the problems of all communities. We have taken note of the activities of EU Rule of Law Mission in Kosovo during the reporting period. Further, as part of an international cooperation effort, we are happy to note that the K4 troops have continued to effectively fulfill their mandate under UN Security Council Resolution 1244. Both the missions need to adhere to their respective mandates and maintain neutrality. Their close tactical cooperation with police authorities in Pristina and EU LEX has ensured that the overall security situations remains safe and secure. In conclusion, I would like to note with appreciation that UNMIC has been playing an important role in promoting security, stability, and respect for human rights. We call on all sides to fully cooperate with UNMIC and facilitate its work. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of India for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I want to begin by welcoming the SRSG Zaida to the Council for the first time. You have our full support in your work going forward. And I'd also like to recognise the Minister Javala Swartz and Minister Selakovic and welcome them to the Council. Mr. President, building peace takes political will. It takes compromise and it takes open channels of communication. In Ireland, we value and believe in dialogue because we have seen that dialogue delivers. It brings peace, it delivers progress, and it delivers for people. This is why we support the Secretary-General's call for constructive and sincere engagement in the EU-facilitated dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina. This UN-mandated dialogue is the channel through which issues and tensions between Kosovo and Serbia can and should be resolved. Both sides have a responsibility to refrain from further divisive rhetoric or actions and to respect and implement the commitments they have made under the dialogue without delay. There have been concrete gains that have improved the daily lives of all communities in Kosovo, and these must not be frittered away by actions that risk aggravating tensions. A comprehensive, final, and legally binding normalisation agreement is essential for the European perspective of both Kosovo and Serbia, and for wider stability in the Western Balkans region. Mr. President, we very much welcome the steps taken by Kosovo to address sexual and gender-based violence, in particular the adoption of a strategy against domestic violence and violence against women. We also value and support UNMIC's role in the promotion of gender equality, including through progressing the WPS and the YPS agenda and providing support for survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. The women of Kosovo have made remarkable gains in political representation at the national level, and we hope to see this replicated at the local level in the coming years. For this to happen, any remaining barriers preventing women's full and equal participation in political life must be removed. The support or access to the resources they need to run for office at the local level also needs to be addressed. The meaningful inclusion of Kosovo's youth in conflict prevention and peace-building efforts is also essential for achieving sustainable and lasting peace. And we took note of the comments of the SRSG on the focus she'll be putting on those YPS and WPS agendas in her remarks. Mr. President, we know that the people of Kosovo want prosperity and stability. We also know that they see EU accession as contributing to this end. We note the progress made by the government of Kosovo in advancing the EU reform agenda. At the same time, more needs to be done, particularly in relation to the rule of law. In this context, I also wish to underline Ireland's support for the Kosovo Specialist Chambers. Countering impunity for past crimes is essential to preventing future violations. It is vital that the authorities in Kosovo adhere to their commitments to the specialist chambers. Mr. President, the UN continues to play an important role through its trust-building projects, bringing together members of different communities, in particular young people, as well as supporting the most vulnerable and marginalised communities in Kosovo. We value in particular UNMIC's work on missing persons and UNHCR's work on the return of displaced persons. Progress on both these issues can provide much-needed comfort and solace to families of the missing and those who have been displaced for too long. They are essential steps in the process of reconciliation in Kosovo and are important for building confidence between Kosovo and Serbia. We see all too often at this Council the misery caused by conflict. We know it takes courage to overcome conflict and to overcome the divisions caused by conflict. But these are steps that need to be taken, that are worth taking to benefit the peoples of Kosovo and Serbia. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Ireland for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I will begin by welcoming Special Representative Ziadeh, and at the same time, I'd like to thank her for her first briefing to this Council as the head of UNMIC. We also welcome Minister Selakovic and Ms. Gervala-Schwartz. Mexico has followed with concern recent events in the region of Kosovo, and we reiterate the importance for all parties to abstain from actions, policies, and rhetoric which could increase tensions. We regret recent attacks against police agents in the Kosovo region, and we echo the statement made by Special Representative Ziadeh calling for moderation and for those who are responsible to be brought to justice. Mr. President, constructive Belgrade-Pristina dialogue without preconditions is the only possible way to find a mutually acceptable solution which will contribute to peace in the region, to social cohesion, and respect for the rights of minorities. This is particularly important given the current circumstances in Europe resulting from the war in Ukraine. We regret the fact in the past 6 months progress has been minimal, and we believe that this Council must make an unambiguous call for redoubled efforts. The inclusive and significant participation of women in all aspects of public life, including in dialogue facilitated by the EU, is critical. We should bear in mind the priorities and expectations of women, youth, civil society, and a broad array of interested actors in order to move forward. We hope that delegations participating in the dialogue will genuinely include the voices of women and youth. Moreover, we have seen with dismay the high levels of violence against women. The study carried out by UN Women at the end of last year concludes that gender-based violence in the political sphere and obstacles to women's full participation in politics is intrinsically linked to exclusion, marginalization, and other forms of discrimination. This type of action must be uprooted, and we therefore welcome the adoption of a protection strategy against domestic violence and violence against women. This strategy must follow the highest international standards, such as those reflected in the Istanbul Convention. Mr. President, although the conflict ended a number of decades ago, its impact is still being felt. I would like to highlight 2 aspects. The first is that there are still 1,620 people reported missing since 1999. We recognize the important backstopping efforts of UNMIC in maintaining contact with the families and members of the Belgrade-Pristina Working Group on persons who are unaccounted for related to the events in Kosovo. However, we regret the fact that the working group has not met during this period, and we call on the parties to resume cooperation within this group, which has proven effective in the past. Secondly, there are more than 15,000 persons who are displaced within the region of Kosovo, almost 70,000 of them in the Western Balkans, and 200,000 of persons from Kosovo, the majority in Serbia. We recognize and recall the importance of protecting the rights of all persons to return to their places of origin. We also urge the authorities in the region of Kosovo to work with civil society organizations and local communities to create an environment which is conducive to their voluntary, safe, and dignified return, as well as to promote the process of reintegration and reconciliation. I would conclude, Mr. President, by expressing my country's gratitude to UNMIC for the important work it does to promote intercommunity and intercultural dialogue and to promote and protect human rights in coordination with KFOR, the European Union, and the OSCE. We hope that with political will, that in the next review of the Council of this issue, we will be able to speak about tangible progress. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Mexico for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank Ms. Caroline Ziade, the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Kosovo, for her remarks regarding the activities of the United Nations Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo from September of 2021 to March of this year. Brazil appreciates the efforts of UNMIC in assisting the people of Kosovo. We understand that despite the remaining challenges, the mission has been accomplishing some of its main objectives, as set out in Resolution 1244, especially in overseeing the development of local institutions, supporting peace-building activities, and providing assistance to local authorities to perform basic administrative functions. Nevertheless, the recent reports point out that more needs to be done regarding the strengthening of the rule of law, the fight against corruption and organized crime, the respect of the rights of minorities, and crucially, the establishment of the Association Community of Serb Majority Municipalities in Kosovo, as agreed in the Brussels Agreements. We also acknowledge the initiatives led by the European Union and the United States to foster dialogue and understanding between Pristina and Belgrade. In this regard, the resumption of direct contact between authorities from both parties last October is particularly welcomed. We note that despite the continued support by the international community, a political settlement remains elusive. As the UNMIC report makes clear, there is much distrust and lack of cooperation between Belgrade and Pristina. Furthermore, within Kosovo, Serbs and other minorities feel discriminated and persecuted. This is most unfortunate, since the political stability of Kosovo is of paramount importance for the Western Balkans. In this regard, we believe that the persistent discussion on the recognition of Kosovo as an independent state has been detrimental to the wider political process and has undermined the prospects for meaningful regional cooperation. According to Resolution 1244, it is clear that the people of Kosovo can enjoy substantial autonomy within Serbia, while the development of self-governing political institutions is aimed at ensuring conditions for peaceful and normal life for all the inhabitants of Kosovo. As the reports of the Secretary General informs us, a substantial autonomy of Kosovo has been generally achieved, but the conditions for a peaceful and normal life for all communities in the region are not yet accomplished. Hence, the main objective of UNMIC remains unfulfilled, and the debate about an independent Kosovo seems premature. It is necessary to put in place a broad dialogue between the various communities in the region in order to bring much-needed stability and prosperity. The principles for such comprehensive political dialogue must be the strict observance of human rights, including freedom of religion and integrity of religious sites, and the strengthening of the rule of law. Many observers have noted that the status quo in Kosovo is unsustainable, and that the lack of agreement can not only worsen tensions and deepen the estrangement amongst all communities, but also risk irreversible changes on the ground and further reduce the prospects of a settlement. Hence, Pristina and Belgrade must display a renewed sense of urgency in resuming the negotiating process. Brazil does not underestimate the complexity of issues involved, in particular regarding the future status of Kosovo. But Brazil has always supported and will remain supportive of the efforts to bring a negotiated solution that allow the peoples of the Balkans to live in peace with security and prosperity. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of Brazil for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of China.
Mr. President, I thank SRSG Ziade for her briefing and welcome the presence of Foreign Minister of Serbia, His Excellency Mr. Selakovic. I also listened attentively to the statement made by Ms. Gerard Schwartz. At a time when Europe is facing enormous security challenges, maintaining stability in Kosovo is of even greater significance. The international community, especially the Security Council, should maintain its attention and engagement, work under the framework of Resolution 1244, and support the parties concerned to seek a mutually acceptable political solution through negotiation and consultation. In this process, Serbia's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity should be fully respected. In light of the current situation, I would like to make 4 points. First, maintain the security and stability of Kosovo. Since September last year, Kosovo has taken a spate of unilateral actions, leading to an escalation of tensions. Until the two sides reach a new consensus through dialogue and consultation, any unilateral actions will only lead to heightened tensions, which is not in the interests of any party or the overall security interests of Europe. The temporary arrangement on vehicle registration plates is about to expire. China encourages the two sides to reach a flexible and pragmatic arrangement under the coordination of the EU and actively consider extending the current temporary arrangement. Second, protect the legitimate rights of the Kosovo Serbs. The harmonious coexistence of all ethnic groups is the key to realizing long-term stability in Kosovo. Pristina should adopt active measures to enhance mutual trust, solidarity, and cooperation among all ethnic groups, including safeguarding the legitimate rights of the Kosovo Serbs. Since January this year, there have been disputes between the two sides over the participation of Serbs living in Kosovo in Serbian elections. China believes that any unilateral moves in violation of established practice will only exacerbate existing differences and will not contribute to the political settlement of the Kosovo issue. We hope that similar incidents will not happen again. The international community, especially the EU, should play an important role in this regard. 3. Continue to promote the dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo. Since July last year, the high-level talks have once again been at an impasse. We look forward to the relaunch of the dialogue process under the auspices of the EU. The negotiation outcomes already reached by the two sides should be fully respected and implemented. We urge Kosovo to take concrete measures to implement as soon as possible the provisions of the Brussels Agreement on the establishment of an association of Serb-majority municipalities in order to resolve a key obstacle in the bilateral relationship. Fourth, support AMIC to fulfill its mandate. AMIC was established pursuant to Resolution 1244 and showed us important responsibilities on the Kosovo issue. Given the current standstill in bilateral talks and continued tension on the ground, maintaining AMIC's presence is crucial. China appreciates the efforts of AMIC under the leadership of SRSG Ziade and supports AMIC to carry on with its work in accordance with its mandate. and to play an important role in maintaining peace and stability in Kosovo, responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, promoting national reconciliation, and assisting the return of displaced persons. The United Nations and Security Council should continue to support UNMIK and provide the political backing, manpower, and financial resources required for the full implementation of its mandate. Kosovo should also provide security guarantee and facilitation for UNMIK's mandated operations. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, first and foremost, we wish to congratulate the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Caroline Ziade, on her first briefing about the situation in the province, and we wish to thank her for her considerations. We welcome the participation of the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Serbia, Nikola Selakovic. We have listened to the views of Madam Donika Gevarda-Schwartz. To begin, we wish to underscore the following. The position of the Russian Federation on Kosovo remains unchanged. Security Council Resolution 1244 remains the international legal basis for resolution of this matter. We advocate achievement by Belgrade and Pristina of a viable, mutually acceptable solution on the basis of this Security Council resolution, which should be in line with international law and should secure the approval of the United Nations Security Council. Before moving to an assessment of the current situation in the province, we wish to remind colleagues of the following. This March marked the 23rd anniversary of the bombing of Belgrade by the NATO coalition. As a result of this 78-day operation, thousands of civilians perished. More than 1,500 residential areas were destroyed, as were 60 bridges and 30% of all schools and hospitals and approximately 100 monuments. The coalition used tens of thousands of bombs and cruise missiles, many of which were equipped with depleted uranium. Overall, 15 tons of this radioactive substance was introduced in the area, which resulted in the contamination of a vast territory. The dire consequences of this crime for the health of people and the environment continue to reverberate to this day. Also, the fact that NATO chose a certain ally on the ground is noteworthy. The Kosovo Liberation Army was chosen as the ally on the ground, and the KLA's manifold crimes remain unpunished to this date. On 7 January 2011, a report was issued from the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe on the crimes perpetrated by the KLA from the year 1998 to 2000, including crimes against humanity, war crimes, systematic abductions and murders, as well as large-scale trafficking in human organs. It is now 2022, and we are still closely monitoring the work of the Special Court on the investigation of the crimes of the KLA. We continue to hope for an objective investigation and a fair verdict. For now, this has been in vain. For our part, we view as unacceptable the attempts undertaken by Pristina to dispute the legitimacy of the judicial process and to convince the international community about the alleged infallibility of KLA representatives. Let us also recall that on 24 March 1999, the permanent representative of the Russian Federation to the United Nations, Mr. Lavrov, cautioned about the adverse consequences of such an act by NATO, not just for prospects of resolving the Kosovo situation and for security in the Balkans, but also the adverse consequences for the resilience of the entire modern-day system of international relations. It is clear that this is when the West donned the garb of the world's policeman and opened Pandora's box. An important step towards ending the bloodletting and beginning work for reconciliation between Belgrade and Pristina should have been the adoption of Resolution 1244 by the Security Council. At the same time, the permanent The Western permanent members of the Security Council were the first to lose sight of the above-mentioned resolution as they hastily sought to recognize the unilateral proclamation of independence of Kosovo in 2011. There was no referendum, nor a resolution of the Security Council or the General Assembly in this regard, and ultimately, a Kosovar quasi-state, a Western pet project was created. Another 2 years then transpired. The negotiations was handed over to Brussels aegis. However, in 2013, the Brussels agreements were arrived at by the parties, and unfortunately, they did not yield tangible political results. The Kosovar Albanians, using myriad pretexts, have for 9 years been sabotaging the creation of the Association of Serb Municipalities, thereby derailing the process itself of the creation of inter-ethnic reconciliation in the province. For this association was designed to meet the core needs of the Kosovar Serbs in the area of security, safety, judicial and political affairs, and socio-economic and cultural affairs. We regret the fact that neither in the Secretary General's reports nor in the statements of most colleagues has this issue been addressed. Without the association, the Kosovar Serbs remain vulnerable. A stark example was the doubling in the number of attacks targeting them and targeting their property. These attacks doubled in 2021 as compared to 2020. There has also been a significant uptick in such attacks this year. From January to March alone, 35 incidents have already taken place. Let us recall that since 1999, there have been virtually no Serbs in the southern parts of Kosovo, and yet efforts to definitively drive them out of the province are fully underway, and there's a clear intent to erase their cultural and religious identity. There's a permanent threat looming over Orthodox churches and monasteries, including those which are enshrined in the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. One of them is the Visoki Dečani Monastery, which since 2016 has not been able to restore its lands despite the ruling of the so-called Constitutional Court of Kosovo in its favor. Beyond Serbs, other non-Albanians are also subject to discrimination. Effectively, there is an intent to drive out all national minorities from the province. The numbers of returning non-Albanians to Kosovo, these numbers are negligible. We would request that Council colleagues give thought to whether they want to be complicit in the creation of an ethnically cleansed Kosovo for Albanians alone. This is unacceptable to us. Also unacceptable is the way that the provincial so-called government violated the electoral rights of Kosovar Serbs. Contrary to previous practice, they were prohibited from voting first during the Serb referendum on 16 January and subsequently and during the general, presidential, and parliamentary elections on 3 April. Ultimately, tens of thousands of people were excluded from the democratic process. We emphatically condemn attempts to obscure the long-term negative consequences of what took place. We demand that moving forward, such legal violence be counteracted in deed, not in word, in line with their broad authority, be counteracted by the international presences, first and foremost the UN mission and the OSCE presence. The list of other dangerous unilateral actions of Kosovars is long in their destabilization of the situation in the Serb-populated north. In September and October 2021, the situation almost spiraled out of control when the Pristina Special Forces took a checkpoint along the administrative line and a number of other areas. Let us recall that the Kosovar police used firearms. Dozens of civilians suffered as a result. Such reckless conduct is ongoing to this date, including in isolated, hence all the more vulnerable Serb enclaves in the south. Each new pretext is more absurd than the last. Spanning the unsuccessful searches for contraband to attempts to seize COVID vaccines. We reject the actions of Pristina regarding UNMIK. There has been no accountability for Kosovo Albanians who were complicit in the beating and detention on 28 May 2019 of the UNMIK officer, Mr. Krasnoshokov. Another mission representative, Mr. Antonov, on 31 December 2021, was declared persona non grata by the provincial authorities. This constitutes an egregious violation of the established international legal norms. Clearly, it is incumbent upon the UN to ensure inviolability of their presence in Kosovo. The activities of the mission in the province is more important than ever before. There's a need for it to be able to fully carry out its mandate and to have the necessary resources to do so. Mr. President, we are very much alarmed by the ongoing attempts, ongoing since late February, by Mr. Kurti and his network to undermine the situation in the region by escalating anti-Serb rhetoric and by calling upon the West to take Kosovo under its protection to protect it from the alleged threats which loom over it. Pristina began to demand escalated and expedited integration into NATO and other Western associations to seek the deployment of a new permanent U.S. military base in the province. These kinds of ideas, like the intent to create a full-fledged army in Kosovo, are fundamentally at odds with Security Council Resolution 1244, and they are fraught with the risk of further fueling tensions. We have heard about deliveries from the British side to Pristina of anti-tank missile systems and guided missiles, as well as the deployment of instructors to train the security forces. As for the Kosovars themselves, they would be well advised to fundamentally reconsider their priorities, to focus resources not on procurement of weapons, including through a special fund that was established to collect funds for strengthening the defense of the province, but they should focus funds on addressing the difficult socioeconomic situation. These are the realities of the modern so-called state of Kosovo. Despite those methods that were adopted by the United States and a number of European countries when it was created in 1999, which I mentioned at the beginning of my statement, at the present moment, neither Brussels nor even Washington are in a position to exert significant influence over Pristina. Even the harsh criticism against Kosovo for their failure to comply with basic democratic and human rights standards, which Western standards have resorted to of late, even this has failed to yield results. Clearly, these kinds of observations are insufficient. In fact, no tangible steps are being undertaken. This all brings dialogue to a dead end, and it leads Brussels on the path to discreditation of mediation efforts. And this is especially unfortunate given that the protracted crisis in the province is escalating. There are clear threats from this area to all of Europe: economic, migration, and even terrorist threats. It is important to understand that this is a reckless approach. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me thank SRSG and head of UNMIK, Ms. Caroline Ziade, for her briefing and wish her success in her new position. I welcome the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and Diaspora of the Republic of Kosovo, Madam Donika Grvala-Schwartz, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Serbia, Nikola Selakovic, to this meeting. Mr. President, let me start by commending the Republic of Kosovo and its authorities for their achievement despite a largely unfavorable environment due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Local elections held last October brought yet another confirmation of how much Kosovo has advanced in building a state for the citizens, by the citizens. Kosovo is a full-fledged democracy and an important actor of stability in the region. Its democratic internal developments and its foreign and security policy has contributed to stabilize the Western Balkans. As we heard, Kosovo's advancement on women, peace and security, and youth and peace and security, and the increase of elected women, including to the highest positions, is remarkable. We applaud the clear positioning of Kosovo on Ukraine and its alignment with sanctions, and commend the Kosovo government and people for the generosity in receiving Afghan refugees and lately also Ukrainian displaced persons, including journalists. Mr. President, since 1999 and for 23 years, UNMIK has accompanied Kosovo and its citizens in rebuilding their future. We thank all those who have offered their contribution to help Kosovo and its citizens move ahead. Following the declaration of independence in 2008 and its international legitimacy through the opinion of the International Court of Justice in 2011, UNMIK's competencies and responsibilities have been gradually transferred to the Kosovo authorities. It was the right thing to do. Also, in response to the considerably improved reality, the reduced frequency of the meetings of the Council has happened. Indeed, when there is not much to say, there is no need to meet. We have therefore come to a moment which calls for a reality check. With the overall progress and consolidation of Kosovo institutions, with the strengthening of its international profile and the prospects of agreement through the ongoing dialogue, there was no doubt that the role of UNMIK would further diminish and erode. There is nothing wrong there. It is in the nature of things. UN missions are not to perpetuate. They are there to perform a task and roll back as soon as possible. UNMIK is not part of the walls of Kosovo. It was mandated to do a job, and in our view, that job, in its core mandate, is done. We ask ourselves what is still there to make UNMIK, in its current configuration, relevant and further needed in Kosovo. We have read very carefully the report. UNMIK has no crucial role in any of the key issues Kosovo needs assistance. The dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia is facilitated by the EU. Public order and security are the focus of Kosovo Police, Kosovo Security Forces, ULEX and KFOR. National minorities' rights are enshrined in the country's constitution and carried out through the country's institutions. The Kosovo justice system is consolidated and improving. There is a key element here we need to have in mind. Kosovo's situation is no longer a matter of peace and security. Kosovo is no longer an issue under Chapter 7. Speaking of peacekeeping now in Kosovo is meaningless. We therefore wonder about UNMIK's raison d'être. Its budget of roughly $42 million per year and a staff of 374 people call for an overall review of the role and effectiveness of UNMIK to avoid duplications with other agencies operating there or just spinning in the void, with a view for the Council to terminate UNMIK's mandate and help move to a more effective UN presence fully fit for purpose in accordance with the needs of the country. In saying so, we commend the work of the UN team in the country in response to Kosovo needs and priorities. But for as long as UNMIK will be in Kosovo, we will expect it to do its best and in full impartiality help Kosovo and its citizens. We listen very carefully to the commitment of SRSG in this respect. Despite the legal aspects involved on how the communication was handled, we expect UNMIK to fully and properly investigate the allegations on its personnel PNG'd by the authorities. Who the persons are and what they did is of public knowledge. We expect UNMIK to properly vet their hires and have them behave in strict conformity with their mandate, in full impartiality and not for any obscure agenda, and in this respect of national security of Kosovo and the rules of the host country. Mr. President, we fully support the EU-facilitated dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia and call on all those involved to accelerate it. There is no alternative to dialogue, but what is needed is an active and productive, not a frozen process. A never-ending dialogue without results simply erodes public trust. Mr. President, the image of the Balkans as a place of turmoil and political instability is bygone. Wounds of the past have not completely disappeared, of course. How could they, knowing what Kosovo and the region have been through? We must not forget the missing persons. There should never be impunity for sexual violence in conflict. We hear the silent scream of some 20,000 Kosovo women and girls who have been used as a weapon of war by Serbs who are still at large. Yet the attention should be devoted to improve the present and better the future. While the Balkans are nowhere near perfection, they live nowadays in a completely different reality. I would gladly challenge anyone in this Council and outside to argue and prove that the Balkans are not nowadays much better off with Kosovo as an independent country. The independence of Kosovo is a reality, an issue settled 14 years ago, and it's not for discussion in this Council or outside. It has been a question for the Kosovars to decide, and they have. Since 2008, the entire region advances in peace and development with a concrete reality and an ever-increasing prospect to close regional cooperation, moving individually and collectively towards the European Union. Western Balkans, maybe this is not known in this Council, have created common institutions where Serbs and Kosovar nationals serve together, such as the Western Balkan Fund and the Regional Youth Cooperation Office, both seated in Tirana. Our leaders meet all the time, everywhere, in Albania, in Serbia, in North Macedonia, and in Kosovo, and they do not talk conflicts, tension of war. They talk reconciliation and cooperation. We talk about freedom of movement of people and capitals. We talk Europe. This is, in our view, the best investment for the future. And yes, in our part of the world, we do not need more weapons. We need brains. We do not need killing drones. We need ideas, innovation, and investments. Mr. President, let me finally address one key issue for the region, both for Kosovo and Serbia, which is reconciliation. The war of aggression in Ukraine brought in our minds the dreadful memories of the war during the dissolution of Yugoslavia. Massacres against the civilian population, be they in Bucha, Ukraine, or in Rača, Kosovo, or in Srebrenica, Bosnia, all have one common thing. They are despicable, unacceptable, intolerable crimes. And accountability always ends by knocking on the door. Milosevic died behind bars. Karadzic is convicted of genocide and is paying for its deeds. A word to the wise. Therefore, instrumentalization of national minorities in Kosovo or anywhere else is playing with fire with terrible consequences, as we have seen so many times. Our region has seen the worst of it in the past. We have argued several times that Russian aggression affects directly or indirectly the entire world, including the Western Balkans, and we should not lose sight or focus in properly mitigating those threats. Russian proxies in the region should not be allowed any space to undermine or roll back achievements. In this respect, we condemn in the strongest terms the recent attacks against the police in Kosovo, as rightly done so by the SRSG. Such criminal attacks only create artificial tensions to favor illegal activity. They should be condemned by all, including by Serbia, and perpetrators must be held accountable. No part of the territory of Kosovo should be left into the hands of lawlessness, and we strongly encourage Kosovo authorities to do whatever needed to make law prevail. Rule of law for democracies is never to be in discussion. There is extensive legislation and good practices in Europe and the Balkans on national minorities. And Kosovo has one of the best and the strongest legislative frameworks with an exemplary implementation record. And it's not us who say that. Even though the minority population of Kosovo accounts for less than 5%, Kosovo has established itself as a multi-ethnic state. And we disagree with the dark picture depicted here by the Minister of Serbia in this respect, since it is simply not the case. Creation of artificial entities that can lead to dysfunctional states is not an option and should not be supported, and Albania will never condone. The only viable solution are those that guarantee rights by law and exercise them through institutions, and this must be the case in Kosovo as well. Mr. President, I would like to encourage Serbia and Kosovo to engage seriously in the EU-facilitated dialogue, and by closing the dark chapters of the past, design their future through mutual recognition, through good neighborliness, through increased economic and trade relations, through exchanges in science, education, and culture, through people-to-people, in particular, youth contacts. There is nothing there to invent, since everything has been done before. There is only need for more political courage, wisdom, and vision. And I will add with an additional word, which I had not foreseen to say, Mr. President. I listened to the Russian colleague I regret to be obliged to react myself as I have the floor, since coming from the region, what we heard is not true. We are used to false narratives by Russia in the latest weeks on Ukraine. Now they are extending it to Kosovo as well. We regret that Russia cannot see the changed reality in the Western Balkans, that its visibility is now blurred so that they cannot see the region as it is, but how they want it to be. And we are sorry for that. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank Special Representative Caroline Ziadeh for her briefing on recent developments on the ground and for her active involvement since her appointment. I take this opportunity to welcome with us Nikola Selakovic, Minister for Foreign Affairs, and I also thank Ms. Donika Javala-Schwartz for her comments as well. Mr. President, some 2 decades after the establishment of the international presence in accordance with Security Council Resolution 1224, the situation in Kosovo remains of concern on a number of fronts. The normalization process between Kosovo and Serbia is falling far short of expectations. We regret that diplomatic efforts and initiatives aimed at the resumption of dialogue in good faith on the basis of existing agreements has not been followed through with action. Despite a few technical meetings, the dialogue has not been held at the highest levels, and there's only been one high-level meeting during the period under consideration. Normalization is at the heart of the regional and international integration process in Kosovo and is a driver which will lead to a virtuous circle of developments. The issue of freedom of movement remains a major challenge. It is crucial for social cohesion in Kosovo and for all citizens to be able to move about freely without fear for their security. In order to do this, a lasting solution must be found, in particular for the license plate issues in the majority Serb northern region. The implementation of the Brussels Agreement is an important pillar in the normalization process and is a key component in autonomy for Serb communities. To delay its implementation will only hamper stability in Kosovo, which it so sorely needs. I would like, however, to welcome the action of UNMIK aimed at promoting harmonious coexistence and increasing inter-ethnic relations and social cohesion. We also welcome the expressed determination of President Vučić to pursue negotiations with Pristina in creating the community of Serb majority municipalities as provided for in the first agreement of principles governing normalization of relations. Greater commitment is in fact needed to provide new momentum. The people of Kosovo need this normalization for their well-being and for economic development. We regret the decision of the Kosovo Parliament not to allow the participation of Kosovo Serbs in the Serbian electoral process in Kosovo. We urge the authorities of Kosovo and Serbia to find a mutually satisfactory agreement in this area. The Quint also has a role to play in this area. Mr. President, the security situation is still quite fragile in Kosovo. Violence affects primarily minority communities, in particular the Serb community. Violence also involves places of worship and religious cemeteries and undermines harmonious coexistence and intercommunity interactions. Discrimination against minority communities must be addressed more decisively, and the law on protection against discrimination must be implemented. Progress in returning and the return and reintegration of displaced persons has also been quite slow. There have only been 118 returns recorded by the UNHCR in the period under consideration. An urgent solution must be found for these people so that they can return home in proper conditions. Turning to missing persons, this is a critical issue for Kosovo. The fact that the Belgrade-Pristina Working Group on missing persons has not held any meetings during the period covered delays even more the cases of 1,620 persons who are still deemed missing since 1998 and 1999. We encourage UNMIC to pursue efforts in this area. We also welcome the work of the Kosovo Governmental Commission entrusted with verifying and recognizing the status of survivors of sexual violence linked to the conflict. It has been able to recognize the status of 1,149 claimants. Recognizing the status of victims of sexual crimes is an important step in reparations. We also encourage the support of UNMIC for the Commission to provide recognition of the status for the 12 survivors before the end of the Commission's mandate in 2023. In general, we encourage increased participation of women in all political actions so that better account is taken of women in public life. In conclusion, we reaffirm our support for UNMIC and we reiterate our encouragement for its mission to build peace and social cohesion in Kosovo. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Gabon for their statements, and I give the floor to the representative of Norway.
Thank you, President. Let me take the opportunity to warmly welcome you, Caroline Ziade, back in your new and challenging position as SRSG in Kosovo and head of UNMIC. Norway looks forward to working closely with you and your team. Let me thank you also for your first briefing to the Security Council and the Secretary General report. One key political and security development within the reporting period was centered around Kosovo's local elections. We are pleased that the overall conduct of these elections was assessed as positive by the EU, while they did also note some lack of transparency and accountability. Yet when it came to the Serbian presidential and parliamentary elections in April, Kosovo's government did not take the opportunity to demonstrate its commitment to the principle of protecting the political and civil rights of all its citizens. We acknowledge that it is part of the prerogative of Kosovo to decide whether or not to permit voting in another country's election on its territory. However, we note that Kosovo decided not to allow participation in the Serbian elections, which had been the case previously. President, last September, we saw renewed tensions between Belgrade and Pristina, triggered by long-standing unresolved aspects of the freedom of movement. A permanent solution to the license plate issue is urgent and would be a step in the right direction. We encourage the parties to strengthen dialogue and to engage constructively based on the Brussels Agreement. Also, while exercising pragmatism in finding mutually acceptable compromises and respecting the commitments already undertaken. Above all, a comprehensive agreement between Kosovo and Serbia on full normalization in relations is key to avoiding a frozen conflict and to achieving improved economic development for all. President, like other speakers, we are deeply concerned about last week's attacks on the Kosovo police in the north of Kosovo. We note that the relevant law enforcement agencies are investigating the incidents and stress that any use of force against the Kosovo police is unacceptable. We also echo the Secretary General in welcoming the adoption of Kosovo's strategy for protection against domestic violence and violence against women. And we emphasize the importance of having the standards of the Istanbul Convention reflected in its implementation. Inclusive approaches are key to peace. Gender mainstreaming, as well as the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in any dialogue or decisions about post-conflict peace building and the future of Kosovo remains crucial. President, the question of a review of the UN mission in Kosovo has been raised several times, while noting that the mission pursues important work in various areas, we would support a closer look at possible efficiency improvements. President, we note the slow overall progress in European Union facilitated dialogue, and we urge all actors to engage fully. Both Kosovo and Serbia should intensify their efforts to improve relations and refrain from actions and rhetoric that may set back dialogue or further increase tensions leading to incidents. There is no alternative to the EU-led process. It needs our full support. Norway will work and continue to work closely with the EU institutions, key EU member states, and the United States to this end. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Norway for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Sayyid al-Rais.
Mr. President, first of all, I would like to welcome Ms. Caroline Ziada, the Special Representative of the Secretary General and the head of the United Nations Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo, and I would like to thank her for her first briefing to the Security Council and her efforts alongside the missions team. I also welcome the participation of the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Serbia, His Excellency Nikola Selakovic, and Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and Diaspora, Donika Gervala-Schwarz, in today's meeting. Mr. President, the UAE believes in the importance of intensifying efforts to reduce tensions, encourage dialogue, and prevent any exacerbations of disagreements and differences between ethnic groups in Kosovo on the one hand and between Kosovo and Serbia on the other, especially in light of the ongoing conflict and the current situation in Europe that has cast a shadow over the entire region, including the Balkans. It is imperative in this regard to remember that more than 2 decades have elapsed since the region was engulfed in war, where tangible progress has been made towards achieving reconciliation. It is thus essential that these efforts do not regress as a result of the recent turmoil in Europe. From this standpoint, it is important to focus on the following points. First, we encourage Kosovo and Serbia to engage actively in dialogue, in the EU-facilitated dialogue, to reach a common agreement between both parties. In this regard, we stress that current tensions should not undermine the efforts made towards peace and stability. Thus, dialogue is the only way to resolve the outstanding issues between both parties, and thus we encourage both parties to return to the negotiating table. Second, we commend the ongoing efforts to disseminate the values of tolerance and peaceful coexistence across all segments of society in Kosovo. In this context, we stress the importance of countering hate speech and preventing the dissemination thereof, especially through social media, in order to build peaceful, secure, and prosperous societies in the region. In this regard, we have to look towards forging the conditions necessary for peaceful coexistence by intensifying communication between ethnic and religious groups in Kosovo, including through the efforts made by the United Nations and other regional organizations, as well as civil society institutions. Third, the UAE sees the importance of supporting women's full and meaningful participation in any mediation efforts to resolve differences between Kosovo's communities, as well as any mediation efforts between both parties. In this regard, we commend the multilateral group on security and gender in Kosovo for the support of the role of women and the efforts to consolidate the gains made by women in Kosovo. We also stress the importance of women's effective participation in the political process and commend the progress made in Kosovo in this regard. Women's participation is essential to ensure that any agreements between both parties should reflect the concerns of both communities, as this will help lay strong foundations for sustainable peace. Fourth, the United Nations should continue to play its important role in Kosovo, especially through its implementation of activities and projects that support government institutions. The UN also undertakes valuable initiatives aimed at building trust between religious and ethnic communities in Kosovo, including through the virtual Kosovo Trust Building Platform, as well as economic empowerment and aid in the search for missing persons. In conclusion, we reaffirm that the difficult geopolitical situation in Europe necessitates redoubling our efforts to resolve the differences between Kosovo and Serbia. We must also ensure that all issues are addressed in a peaceful and sustainable manner in order to achieve security and stability for both countries and the region as a whole. Doing so will help lay strong foundation to prevent further disputes or escalation thereof in the Balkans. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the UAE for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Special Representative Ziadeh, for your briefing today. We look forward to working with you. I also like to thank Foreign Minister Selakovic and Foreign Minister Gavala Schwartz for participating in the meeting. Mr. President, as has been noted, this is the first UNMIC briefing since Russia's brutal and unprovoked war against Ukraine. With Europe and the world responding to the consequences of President Putin's war of choice, the preservation of stability in the Western Balkans remains of utmost importance. In that regard, I just need to respond to the comments of the Russian delegation earlier in this meeting. The Russian intervention opened with the usual misinformation and disinformation we have come, I think, regrettably, to expect from the Russian delegation these days. For example, use of the scare term radioactive depleted uranium. I won't take the Council's time rebutting the falsehoods that we heard, but colleagues, I think we've all seen pictures live in the last few days from Bucha, from Mariupol, pictures, of course, no Russian citizen will freely be able to see. And I think as long as pictures like this continue to directly flow from Ukraine daily, no delegation involved in causing those pictures has the standing or credibility to lecture anyone in the chamber on respecting human rights or to accuse any other state of reckless behavior. Let me be clear, the United States remains committed, together with our European partners, to fostering peaceful, prosperous, multi-ethnic societies that uphold and respect human rights and the rule of law across the Western Balkans. The United States strongly urges both parties to engage energetically in all aspects of the EU-facilitated dialogue, to find solutions for the outstanding issues, implement existing agreements, and make concrete progress toward normalizing relations with the goal of mutual recognition. The EU-facilitated dialogue remains the best platform for achieving progress, not only to existing tensions, but also on issues that impact the daily lives of people in the region. We therefore welcome the EU Special Representative's plans to host chief negotiators from both parties this month to continue this important work. We call on both Pristina and Belgrade to resume cooperation on missing persons. This working group has previously achieved tangible results in providing answers to the families of the missing, and we join the Secretary General in welcoming the commitment of both parties to advance such efforts, including through the European Union facilitated dialogue process. Mr. President, it remains as clear as ever that UNMIC has fulfilled its purpose, as outlined in Security Council's original mandate in 1999. We commend the work of the UN entities, agencies, and funds that are active in the country to further the development of democratic norms and institutions in Kosovo and in the region. However, a peacekeeping mission is clearly no longer necessary for this work to continue. It is time to reduce the frequency of these briefings to an annual basis. UNMIK played an important role in the early days of Kosovo's stabilization and development, but it has outlived its purpose. The Council needs to devote its limited time and resources to addressing other issues. We therefore call again on the Council to end UNMIK's mandate and enable the UN presence in Kosovo to transition into a more effective role for the benefit of Kosovo and for the entire region. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. President. I join others in welcoming SRSG Ms. Caroline Ziade, being her first time in the Council in her new capacity, and thank her for the briefing. My delegation supports you, SRSG, and your team in the execution of your mandate. We also welcome the participation of His Excellency Mr. Nikola Selakovic, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Zambia, and Ms. Donika Chavala Schwarz. President, Kenya welcomes the continued consultative efforts between Belgrade and Pristina. We call on the parties to uphold their commitments made within the framework of the European Union facilitated dialogue, bearing in mind that negotiation is the only viable path to normalization of relations. We are deeply concerned by the recent reports of a string of armed attacks against police agents. These attacks underscore the need to do more to entrench the rule of law as a prerequisite for genuine reconciliation and enduring peace. Kenya notes the continuing efforts by UNMIK and other UN agencies to support the Kosovo authorities in their COVID-19 response, including the expansion of vaccination sites and provision of specialized training for health workers on COVID-19 pandemic. We commend UNMIK in particular for supporting initiatives to meet the challenges posed by COVID-19 and support post-pandemic recovery as part of trust-building efforts between communities as well as between people and institutions. Kenya reiterates the need to counter the use of divisive rhetoric and hate speech, especially through social media. In this regard, we hope to hear more in due course on the pilot initiative launched by UNMIK last year to monitor incitement to hatred and hate speech on social and online media. Kenya underscores the need for increased participation of women and youth and civil society in decision-making processes and cross-community dialogue. We recognize the role of UNMIK in this regard and encourage both sides to ensure the meaningful participation of these groups so that their needs and expectations within the EU facilitated dialogue and other processes are taken on board fully. As I conclude, I reiterate the need for the parties to recommit to the implementation of Security Council Resolution 1244 and constructively engage in the dialogue in order to make swift progress on the comprehensive normalization of their relations. We encourage them to maintain the peace and refrain from any acts that could spark an escalation. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Kenya for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, I wish to thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General for her briefing, and I wish to congratulate her once again upon her appointment. I also welcome the participation of the Minister for Foreign Affairs of both Kosovo and Serbia. France wishes to reiterate our commitment to the European prospect for both Kosovo and Serbia. This prospect is only possible if both Belgrade and Pristina peacefully resolve their dispute. A comprehensive, lasting, and binding agreement is necessary to normalize their relations. The European Union will fully contribute to this through dialogue facilitated by the Special Representative Miroslav Lajcik. At present, there's a need for Kosovo and Serbia to fully comply with and to fully implement the agreements previously arrived at, and for them to engage in good faith on the path towards dialogue. To that end, France calls for constructive efforts towards a resolution of the bilateral disputes to avoid fueling tensions and for action in line with the values and the principles which undergird European integration. We also cherish the hope for the working group on vehicle registrations to promptly reach a lasting negotiated compromise solution. We fully support the mediation of the Special Representative of the European Union, Miroslav Lajcik. We are satisfied, given the growing judicial activity since 2020 of the specialized chambers for Kosovo and the Office of the Special Prosecutor. We reaffirm our support for the counter-corruption efforts and our support for efforts against impunity for perpetrators of grave crimes. We encourage greater transparency in the process of appointments to senior bodies. France welcomes the adoption in January of this strategy to counter domestic violence and violence against women and its corresponding action plan, as well as the plan to host a high-level summit on women, peace, and security in Kosovo in 2022. The involvement of women in dialogue and reconciliation, and more broadly, women's political participation should be encouraged. This is necessary for a lasting and constructive resolution to the dispute between Belgrade and Pristina. We wish to deliver our full support for the efforts of Madam Caroline Ziadeh at the helm of the United Nations Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo in seeking to advance security, stability, reinforcement of rule of law, and respect for human rights in Kosovo and the region at a time when the geopolitical context is hardening. UNMIK can count on the concerted action of the EU Rule of Law Mission and ULEX Kosovo, to which France has stepped up its support. Alongside Portugal and Italy, we have established a standby force for the European Gendarmerie Force. France, like the European Union, will remain committed to stabilization of the Western Balkans and for normalization of relations between Belgrade and Pristina. Their shared European future hinges on this. Thank you.
The representative of France for their statements, and I give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. At the outset, let me acknowledge the presence of His Excellency Mr. Nicholas Selakovic, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Serbia. I also thank Ms. Caroline Ziadeh for her briefing and join others in congratulating her on assuming duty as the SRSG and head of the UNMIK. SRSG, my delegation assures you of its cooperation and support during the period we shall be serving on the Council. We also welcome the Secretary General's comprehensive report on the implementation of the mandates of UNMIK in promoting peace and security in Kosovo and in the region pursuant to the decision of this Council in its resolution 1244. I've also taken note of the views shared with the Council by Ms. Donika Shevala Schwash. Mr. President, achieving a normalization of the situation in the autonomous province of Kosovo is necessary for the long-term peace, security, and prosperity of the Western Balkan region and the wider European region. To this end, we encourage the resumption of constructive negotiations between the representative of Belgrade and Pristina within the framework of the European Union facilitated dialogue, and urge the parties to work towards concrete progress on mutual understandings and previously reached agreements. Ghana remains supportive of an open, transparent, and inclusive process of dialogue involving women, youth, and all sectors of society to ensure the sustainability and durability of the agreements reached. We believe that further close cooperation between the sides is necessary to address the common challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, the energy crisis, and the economy. That collaborative effort can, however, only rest on the foundations of multi-ethnic stability and a firm respect for civil and political rights in the autonomous province. We also note the need to swiftly address the developing tensions arising from the conduct of the recently held elections and related issues of free movement, and further call for tolerance in dealing with incidents affecting religious and cultural sites. We encourage all sides to refrain from rhetoric that could be inflammatory and actions that are unilateral to avoid the risk of escalation in a region whose security environment is presently fragile. We welcome the work of ANMIC in building trust and social cohesion among the various communities, ethnic groups, and institutions. We also commend the mission's support for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially those initiatives relating to gender protection and empowerment, and youth, peace, and security. Such efforts remain key to promoting unity and forging peaceful relations among the people. Finally, we encourage a unified approach by the Council and the international community in finding a lasting and comprehensive solution in Kosovo in accordance with the fundamental principles of international law, the Charter of the United Nations, and Resolution 1244. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
I thank the representative of Ghana for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the United Kingdom. Let me begin by congratulating Special Representative Ziadeh on her appointment and thank her for her briefing. We welcome the opportunity new leadership provides for an improved relationship with the Kosovo government and a fresh look at how UNMIC can adapt to serve the current conditions in Kosovo. We encourage continued constructive engagement between the new SRSG, UNMIC, and the Kosovo government. UNMIC has played a vital role in the incredible progress Kosovo has made since Resolution 1244 was adopted in 1999. But conditions on the ground are unrecognisable from 1999, and a review of UNMIC's role and responsibilities is needed. Kosovo's democracy and institutions continue to show their maturity. In this context, we must condemn last weekend's violent attacks against the Kosovo police, who represent and protect all of Kosovo's citizens. We congratulate the current government of Kosovo on its first year in office. In particular, we welcome the renewed commitment to prioritising the rule of law and fighting corruption, including through legal reforms and anti-corruption initiatives. The government's continuing commitment to addressing the legacies of the 1998-99 conflict, including through commissions for missing persons and victims of sexual violence, and Kosovo's ongoing international contribution through its support to the evacuation from Kabul and the humanitarian response to Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. We note, however, perceptions in some quarters that the Kosovo Serb community's concerns and views sometimes go unheard. The recent decision on voting in Kosovo in Serbia's elections is an example. We encourage the government to refocus its efforts to meet its constitutional duty to integrate minority communities and address their concerns. We are concerned by the increase of dangerous rhetoric in Kosovo and the region, leading to security incidents. The deployment of fighter jets to the Kosovan border in September is an example of this. Reports of the United Kingdom supplying anti-tank missiles, referred to by the Russian Federation, are baseless. But to be clear, the UK supports Kosovo's right to develop its own armed forces. Finally, I would like to emphasise the UK's renewed commitment to peace and security in the region, including through our Prime Minister's appointment of a special envoy to the Western Balkans, Sir Stuart Peach. We fully support the EU-facilitated dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo under EU Special Representative Miroslav Lajčák. Now is the moment for both parties to engage in the dialogue in good faith, honour their dialogue commitments, be open to compromise and creativity, and avoid actions or rhetoric that could reduce prospects for a comprehensive and sustainable normalisation agreement that benefits the people of both countries. I now resume my function as President of the Council. The representative of the Russian Federation has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I cannot but respond to the statement delivered by our U.S. colleague who commented on my statement on the Kosovo issue, and in so doing drew a parallel to the situation in Ukraine. I would call upon him not to engage in polemicism and to familiarize himself with the statement of the U.S. representative during a Security Council meeting on Kosovo on the 24th of March, 1990. Your own double standards will then become quite obvious to you. For 78 days, you bombed Belgrade. You killed nearly 1 million Iraqis. What did you transform Libya into? And these are countries which are thousands of kilometers from you, and they pose no threat to you. And yet, having actively fabricated various theories of limited sovereignty or humanitarian interventions. You mentioned that apparently I cannot teach you anything under the present circumstances, and yet you have been teaching the residents of Belgrade, Baghdad, Basra, Mosul, Raqqa, Baghouz, as well as Afghan provinces of Kandahar and other parts of Afghanistan. Not all of your strikes were precise, to put it mildly. And yet, this is something different. This is collateral damage, as Madeleine Albright put it. And apparently this collateral damage was justified from your standpoint. Indeed, the truth lies in the fact that the crux, the essence of your policy, the essence of your action is rooted in a single premise, that the West is always right, that international law can be distorted into any direction if this advances the interests of Washington and your military-industrial complex. The violations of human rights are condemned only when this is beneficial or convenient to you, and international legal mechanisms are applicable only with respect to those who you previously already ahead of time labeled as criminals. For example, you did not wait for an investigation into the heinous provocation which transpired in Bucha, but perhaps you identified your perpetrators even before this provocation was staged. I would call on you not to engage in these double standards. These are double standards and approaches that are visible not just to me, but to other peoples, including the Serbs. Insofar as what lies behind your actions, there's only one goal that is clear behind your actions: a willingness, a desire of NATO to dictate through force, to dictate their will and impose their will upon other members of the international community. Thank you for having given me the floor.
There are still more requests for further statements from our participants. Let me encourage participants to keep these statements concise in the interests of time. Now, His Excellency Mr. Nikola Selakovic, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Serbia, has asked for the floor to make a further statement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Esteemed members of the Security Council, I have the obligation to react on the words said by Mrs. Gervala-Schwarz here today. Instead of speaking about the problems on the ground, about the real problems on the ground, about disrespect of human rights, abolition of political freedoms, about more than 200,000 internally displaced persons, about desecration of churches, monasteries, and cemeteries, about totally ignored crimes by Kosovo Albanians without any kind of judicial epilogue, Mrs. Gervala-Schwarz was telling us a story about her political wishes and goals, abusing the UN Security Council session to speak against UNMIK, to speak about its role and against the President of the Republic of Serbia, Mr. Aleksandar Vučić, who is, by the way, the President of your country too, Mrs. Gervala-Schwarz. And you should pay the special respect when you're speaking about the President of your country. Yes, it is the truth that so-called Kosovo is the result of separatist movement, of terrorist activities, of narco-trafficking and human organs trafficking. And Mrs. Gervala-Schwarz can give us lessons on that, helping to the entire world to know how something similar shouldn't happen, never, ever. Mrs. Gervala-Schwarz was speaking about butchers of the Balkans, but she missed to mention that the real butchers of the Balkans are the former so-called president of so-called Kosovo, Hashim Tači, and former so-called speaker of the Prishtina's parliament, Kadri Veselji. And at this very moment, both of them are in The Hague, in the detention unit of the special court formed by Pristina for the KLA's crimes because of their dimensions without precedent. Serbia is an independent, sovereign state with clear policy goals, which include the European path and respect of its traditional friends. The accusations against Serbia claiming that it is someone's proxy are disrespectful of this august body and the Organization of the United Nations. Serbia is a pillar of peace and stability in the region, and that has been stated by the leaders of almost all the member states sitting here today together with us. When it comes on the relation regarding the regional stability and cooperation, the contrast between President Vučić and Albin Kurti has never been bigger and more obvious. What the President is building every day, the bridges of cooperation in the region, such as Open Balkan Initiative, solidar exchange of missing goods, joint infrastructure projects. In the same time, Albin Kurti is destroying, mostly during the night, by sending special armored units, banning political rights, and ruining dialogue process. It is normal for him. Kurti has been one of political commissioners of so-called KLA, whose many victims are still waiting for the justice. Esteemed members of the Security Council, during June 1998, KLA terrorists attacked villages Retimlje and Ostorusha near Orahovac. Terrorists kidnapped 15 males from Kostić family and killed all of them. The only member of the family survived was in that time young woman Olgica Božinović Kostić. She was beaten and then raped. And she was the only one, as I said, survived from that family. Almost 24 years after this horrible crime, nobody has never, ever been proceeded, neither sentenced. At the same time, it is the same situation with the crimes who were done by these named by Mrs. Gervala-Schwarz as the some who helped them. On May 14, 1999, NATO aircrafts bombed on a road between Prizren and Suva Reka a long column of Albanian refugees, killing 87 persons, all civilians, 10 newborns, 26 kids under 15 years old. The term genocide should not be abused, especially not for the political sensationalist purposes to which Pristina has continuously been prone. Such rhetoric, in general, arbitrary assessment and claims without any evidence are frivolous, unfounded in reality, and serve the purpose of gaining cheap political points. Such irresponsible claims jeopardize any possibility of progress in the normalization between Belgrade and Pristina, between Serbs and Albanians. Finally, if we talk about the ethnic composition of the population of Kosovo and Metohija, then and now we should clearly present the facts and say that over 90% of persons living in Kosovo and Metohija today are Albanians, and that Serbs suffered in recent decades, that they were victims of crimes and expelled from their centuries-old ancestral homes and forced to leave them due to intimidation, discrimination, and threats. In support of that, we remind you that over 200,000 internally displaced persons residing in the Republic of Serbia without the possibility and conditions to returning to their ancestral homes. Pristina and its policy are responsible for that. Therefore, this idea and the attempt to reverse the well-known and often publicly proclaimed long-term aspiration and political goal of Albanian leaders from Kosovo and Metohija over the decades to create an environment with an ethnic composition that includes exclusively Albanians is cynical. It is the same situation when we are speaking about the sexual violence against women. Of course that every crime is something horrible. But the data in the report we are discussing today was collected on the basis of the work of the Commission for the Verification and Recognition of Sexual Violence Victim Status in Kosovo and Metohija. Since the establishment of the Commission in February 2018, a total of 1,656 applications have been registered, of which 1,149 have been accepted. The number of victims does not diminish the horrific effect of this type of violence on each victim individually, but it should also be noted that speculating on numbers does not either contribute to the achievements of justice and leads to politicization and slowing down the reconciliation process. Mrs. Garvala said they are a vivid democracy with a huge potentials in the future and a role model for the democracy. They are not even able to respect their so-called constitution. Let me just mention something what is mentioned in the Secretary General's report, speaking about the need to respect their so-called constitutional court decision on the restitution of the property of Monastery Visoki Dečani. And it is just one of dozens of similar or such decisions. But it is not strange that she was speaking in such a way. The reason is very simple. She was representing only herself, not an independent, internationally recognized country, which is the UN member state. And it is going to stay like that because their reason and their motivation is not to get the independence. These esteemed members of the Security Council, let me just tell you that you should take any of the interviews on Mr. Albin Kurti, and you are going to see that their final aim is how to make greater Albania and not an independent so-called state of Kosovo. Thank you for your attention.
I thank Mr. Selakovic for his statements. Ms. Donika Guerrero-Schwartz has asked for the floor to make a further statement. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Stressing that the dialogue process is a very important one, and stressing in my speech that Kosovo is eager and ready for the dialogue process should make us think about how possible is it to achieve progress in a dialogue process facilitated through Brussels and with an active role which we very much welcome from the United States, United Kingdom, European Union, member states and others. and being witness of this session shows for everybody being here how difficult the process has been, continues to be, and should not be in the future. Because the Balkan is facing huge influence of cyber war and fake news. And I asked myself very often if the ones who organize the fake news, are they the first victims themselves? Do they really believe the fake news that they are spreading? Or is that just a political decision to take them and to manipulate the public international opinion about that? I'm really not sure which of both opportunities is, but hearing in rows such fake informations and lies makes it difficult to remain serious and just to continue this session in your presence without going on each and one of them, what I'm not going to do, because I'm convinced you who are sitting here know very well what has happened in the 90s. That is one truth. There are no alternative truths, ladies and gentlemen. It's one truth, and everybody knows the truth about the butcher of the Balkans. We do not need to create new ones because it's very clear. It's Slobodan Milosevic, and it's pity that the Serbia of today is not able to distance themselves until today from the crimes that Milosevic committed, not only in Kosovo. He started in Slovenia, then in Croatia, then in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and at the end in Kosovo. And yes, NATO came to finish, to end the genocide. And out of this multilateral engagement, and yes, I understand perfectly why Russia is so aggressive against Kosovo, because Russia is aggressive against the success story that Kosovo represents in the world, the success of a multilateral intervention who brought out a democratic and prosperous country. That is the story of Kosovo, and that is the story of the intervention of the democratic world to end the genocide. And being here today and listening to the representative of Russia talking about the Kosovo Liberation Army reminds me of the brave people of Ukraine who are defending their country. These are the same words you are saying about them. And we are witnessing what is happening in Ukraine. And I'm very proud, very, very proud, representing today a country from which brave soldiers, women and men, members of the Kosovo Liberation Army, defended their own people, their own houses, and their own country. So I'm very proud about that, and I would be not proud representing one of your countries here today. But it's on you and not on me. What you do, I decide what I do and how I represent. The Serbian foreign minister is trying to not only to falsificate the facts, but to do something very similar to Slobodan Milosevic in the 80s. That's how the war started in Balkans. It started with creating a perception that the Serb minorities are in danger, that it needs the intervention of Serbia with false propaganda and fabricating news. And we know very well, and better than me, it's known in Belgrade because that's where there happened and was planned. We have the case, Panda case in Peja, where for years and years they pretended that KLA soldiers have killed Serb Kosovars, And now everybody knows Serbian journals write about being that planned in Serbia and not in Kosovo. Having Serbs killing other Serbs to create this image of they are in danger. And once you mention organ trafficking, let me talk about Dick Marty. Just let me talk about a Swiss senator who has prepared a report about crimes that he accused Kosovar representatives on having committed war crimes and others during the war and after that. And the same Mr. Dick Marty has told the media in the last days that the Swiss police approached him long ago and offered him the highest security in Switzerland because Serbian intelligence agency wanted to assassinate him and to put the blame on Kosovo. This is the wording of the Swiss police. It's not Kosovar police pretending that. So it is a long tradition, and ladies and gentlemen, it is a very, very dangerous tradition, and we see that in Ukraine when you start to, through propaganda, to create the impression that people are in danger who are not, and that they need the protect of third sides who do not protect them, but only follow their political vision. In that what the Serb representative told us today, it's not about Serb citizens in Kosovo, because Serb citizens in Kosovo are protected through a very modern constitutional framework from 2008. I'm proud to say that we have the most modern constitution in Europe in giving minorities extraordinary rights, not only in representation, but in participation in every level of statehood and institutions. So it's not about the rights of Serbs, it's about gaining political influence, and it's about not recognizing the realities and treating Kosovo as a non-existent country. But we are there, we stay there, and every day more and more we gain more international support. And the Republic of Kosovo has and will show continuously that democracy and European values are the fundament of our country. So if you see the approval rates of diverse countries, in different countries in the Western Balkans, you will see that Kosovo has more than 90% approval for EU and more than 90% approval for NATO membership and NATO alignment. So we are on our way doing our work for what we are elected, and urge you very, very loud, please. We know that Ukraine, the war in Ukraine is taking very much from the time that you have in disposal for dealing with other regions in the world. But keep what is happening now, not 1999, what is happening now in the Western Balkans, and please send the right messages to those who are going to destabilize that region. The investment of the international community in peace and stability in the Balkans is too huge to just ignore what is happening now and what the signals are. Thank you very much.
I thank Ms. Gavalis-Schwartz for her statements. The representative of Albania has asked for the floor to make a further statement. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I will not argue with Minister Selakovic, and for many reasons, because even when we disagree, we can do that in Belgrade, in Tirana. We don't need to take the time of the Council. But since it's hard to agree with everything that I heard, and since I heard that he ended his second remarks with an obsession we continue to hear, unfortunately, the greater Albania, let me tell you the perspective that we have in Albania, and I hope we share it with all the Western Balkan neighbors and partners. What we care in Albania is not greater this on that. We care to build open Balkans and not broken Balkans, because the broken we have had. We want to have united Balkans and not ignited Balkans, because the ignited we have had. And we want everyone around the table, including Serbia and Kosovo together, and no one on the menu. Because we know where we come from, and we have seen the worst, as I mentioned. And if we have drawn any lesson from the tragedies of the 90s, it is what may happen if we let ourselves taken back by misjudgment and wrong ideas. If we don't have the courage to face reality and move on, we should not anywhere let extremist ideas dictate our agendas. Because youth in Pristina, in Tirana, in Belgrade, they want the same thing: better lives, freedom, opportunities, and joining the European Union. We should be able to give them that, not only because this is just, but because now we can. Let's not forget, nothing good comes from when you work to harm your neighbor. Instead, there are only benefits you can do when you do everything to work for good, look ahead and share the dividends of good neighborliness. And as the French say, à bon entendeur salut. And no, Minister, the only great and greater goal that we have in our agenda is joining the European Union. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania. His Excellency, Mr. Nikola Selakovic, has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I respectfully request that you make these your concluding remarks, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Esteemed members of the Security Council, I have to react on what I heard about Mr. Dick Marty. The Republic of Serbia finds it unfortunate that unverified information appeared in the international public, which caused great damage to the reputation of the Republic of Serbia and its intelligence services, and all those who performed their duties in full compliance with the law. The Republic of Serbia and its relevant security and intelligence services remain as before open to international cooperation with their partners and expect these claims to be checked as soon as possible. It is not good for someone's tendencies and creative construction of a conspiracy to be abused in this UN forum, because it can only harm the trial in progress in the specialist chambers for KLA war crimes in The Hague, putting additional pressures on the key war crimes witnesses who are actually witnessing about the human organs trafficking. On this occasion, as well, Serbia praises Dick Marty for the courage he showed, aware of the danger he exposed himself to when in 2010, in his report to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, he shared his horrific findings about the crimes committed by the so-called KLA. I have also to react on one sentence when I heard that, I quote, Serbs are protected on Kosovo, end of quote. If Serbs are protected, why more than 200,000 internally displaced Serbs from Kosovo and Metohija cannot return to their homes, to their apartments? If they are protected, why do we have, for more than 15 years, more than 43,000 pending court cases on property issues, which was taken by force to these Kosovo Serbs who are, I quote, protected? Can you imagine how these who are not protected are living there? And I fully agree with what was said by the permanent representative of the neighboring Republic of Albania. Of course, that we are willing to see the open Balkan, including all non-EU member states, and entities from the Western Balkan. We are willing to see there not only Albania and North Macedonia, but also Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as Montenegro, but also we have invited Pristina. And they have accepted that invitation in the Washington Agreement. But after that, it was refused by Albin Kurti. And I wasn't telling about the goals of the Republic of Albania, with whom we are having very good relations, but I was saying that Albin Kurti is the one not willing to have the dialogue process, but willing to have the Greater Albania. That's what he was saying and what he was stating in numerous occasions. And just to end, please thank you very much, Mr. President, for the occasion to refer on these words. But I have to say something more. Even the Ukraine, which is, as well as Russia, a friendly country to the Republic of Serbia, even they did not recognize you. Even they didn't recognize so-called Kosovo. And for the obvious reasons. Thank you very much for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Selakovic. Ms. Donika Gavela-Schwartz has asked for the floor to make a further statement, and likewise, I respectfully ask that you make this the concluding statement. Thank you.
I really tried to skip this, but it's not possible, because we need to put facts against lies. The protection of minorities in Kosovo is stronger than in most countries in Europe and beyond. We have provisions in our constitution, in our laws, in our administrative practice. Our army and our police is ethnically mixed because we wanted it, and yes, we are proud on that. The Constitution of Kosovo guarantees 20 out of 120 seats for minorities exclusively, let alone that they can compete for the other 100 seats as well. Half of the 20 reserved seats, namely 10 of them, are exclusively reserved for the second numerous ethnic minority, the Serb minority. So, within the privileges for the minorities, there is a privilege again for the Serb minority. Let me describe an example of one specific practical impact of our protection rights. The constitutional provision has led to the result that our coalition, which has won more than 50% of the votes in the last elections, did not get a majority of seats in the parliament. Even if we would have won the majority of seats, our constitution requires that the government of the Republic of Kosovo includes ministers of the minorities, regardless the election outcome. So, we have a follow of supporter of Mr. Vučić from Serbia in our government. The scale of minority protection is not found in any other country in Europe or beyond. Our country is born out of genocide, as I said. Mr. Vučić has been part of the system of Milosevic, and he propagated that genocide is a heroic act. He never, ever apologized, just threatened Kosovo recently again and again. And his hardcore fan is sitting with me and the others at the table in cabinet meetings. Can you imagine that? Just imagine that in one other country in the neighborhood. So I have a clear message to the Serb propagandists. Stop those lies. Simply stop those lies. Nobody, not the people sitting here and not the others outside, are taking these lies seriously. Follow the example of Kosovo before criticizing. I have the invitation for all of you who criticize without knowing the facts. We would invite everybody who criticizes these provisions is not enough to implement half of these guarantees in their own countries first. Only half. maybe even only a third. Try to do that. Please provide the equivalent of 20 out of 120 seats for minorities in your parliaments. Please guarantee your most adversarial opposition, who is directed by a hostile foreign country, a seat at your government table. That is obviously a rhetoric request each country has to decide on his own. But this following remark is a serious note. We are not only a small, but proud country. We are also one of the most tolerant countries with regards to religion and respect for others. That is our tradition, and that is our DNA. Speaking again about Dick Marty, I must share one very private experience. I have been in the age of 10, as my father, who needs to leave Kosovo, being a journalist and a writer and a musician. And he escaped old Yugoslavia to go to Germany, and was from this, then called UDB, now called BIA, Secret Service, who was assassinated in Germany in age of 36 because of his standing for freedom for Kosovo. And it's the same service who has assassinated more than 59 Croat dissidents in Germany. There is a long tradition in having this service in assassinating people outside the country. That is an old experience. So what Dick Marty told us, and he's not a friend of Kosovo. He has never been, and he will never become a friend of Kosovo. Because what he stated in this report, the court will prove that that's not true. But even mentioning that, Dick Marty is a friend of Serbia, and it has been difficult for him to tell to the opinion, to the public, that it is Serbia who wanted to kill him and to blame Kosovo for that. And it's a long tradition. Everybody of us knows that. You know that. I know that. These respected people know that. So, about the president that you mentioned, and it's an old saying from October last year. Yes, I have a president. My president has been attending the session last year in October, and we are very proud to have a president. Her name is Dr. Vjosa Osmani. He's one of the youngest presidents in the world, a very much respected woman who has a long experience in politics in Kosovo, and through her courage, she has shown how the future of the Balkans in the European Union can be. And I will conclude with greater countries in the Balkans. Stating always something that Prime Minister Kurti has mentioned in the past will not help for the present and for the future, because talking about the past is not a fair game with Serbia. It let look you bad, talking only about the past. So that's why we try to talk about the present and the future. And there are others talking about and acting against neighbors for changing borders in the Balkans and elsewhere. We have Vladimir Putin talking about changing borders through war, and we have ministers in the government of Alexander Vučić who are talking about Serbia, and having members of government who use the terminology of the 90s and of Slobodan Milosevic now at these very fragile times is not how we should behave. I want to repeat, Kosovo is very committed to contribute constructively not only to the dialogue with our northern neighbor through the facilitation of the European Union and with the help of other partners and allies, but at the same time to give a contribution for peace and stability in the world and to show that we are a reliable partner and ally for all of those who believe in us. Thank you very much.
I thank Ms. Gavalla-Schwartz for her statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.